10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
Alexa, start ReMars.
Starting ReMars. Please welcome the Senior Vice President of Alexa at Amazon, Tom Taylor.
Welcome to ReMars. I'm so excited to see so many people here in person. Good afternoon. My name is Tom Taylor. I currently have one of the best jobs in the world, leading the team that brings Alexa, the AI assistant, to life for over 100 million customers around the world. At Amazon, we believe that AI and the advancements in machine learning, automation, robotics, and space, Mars, are the engines that will drive society forward for the next 100 years. Now, this may seem like a bold statement, but we could look back in time to see similar technological impacts over time. 100 years ago, the internal combustion engine and electricity were the drivers of change of how we live and work and interact with each other. 100 years before that, harnessing steam and water power, new chemical manufacturing influenced almost every aspect of daily life. And even over the long span of time, think how technological advancements in paper and printing, medicine, navigation, they had an enormous positive impact on society. But more important than technology itself is the people, the builders, the dreamers that brought it all to fruition. And it's often convenient to attribute advancements to those individual geniuses such as Da Vinci or Gutenberg or Madame Curie, but we all recognize from our own experience that it takes a village. It's never just one person. This was brought home to me recently. I get to travel back to Michigan, and I often sneak in time to see the Henry Ford Museum. And even there, I was struck by, here's a museum dedicated to one person, the contributions of one person. And yet, if you look at all the photos and the displays, they show all the other engineers and the bankers and the workers that brought us that car for every person. In 2019 on this stage, we said we wanted this to be the crossroads of builders and dreamers. And that's still true today. We want to help foster the village that it takes to bring society and move it forward in this next century. This belief in bringing people together is positive change. This is the inspiration for ReMars. And you've come from all over the world to be here. We have executives, we have developers, we have scientists, thought leaders and builders from academia to heavy industry, but all with a specific focus on machine learning, automation, robotics, and space domains. We have some pretty amazing speakers lined up over the next 3 days. We'll hear from leaders like NASA, from MIT, from NVIDIA, and we'll be hearing from folks that are building autonomous cars, lunar vehicles, fighting climate change from space. Broad catalog of immersive sessions over the days, workshops that you get to choose from this week. These range from intermediate to advanced. I hope you do 3 things this week. And I choose these words specifically from the leadership principles that inspire us at Amazon. First, learn and be curious. Listen and interact with folks that may not be in your normal circle. Number 2, think big. Be inspired by what could be. And third, dive deep. Dive into the sessions about how to make your dreams possible. Now, let me introduce you to our host for the rest of the program. And in choosing our host, we did find someone that embodied these same 3 leadership principles: thinking big, diving deep, and staying forever curious. Many of you may know him from his role as a popular television host or from his work on Tested, a content platform and community for makers and builders. Please help me welcome to the stage Adam Savage.
Thank you. Hey, Tom.
Adam, so great. Adam, I want to share with the audience a moment that we had at a conference earlier this year where I kind of jumped into a conversation that you were having with Brent from Blue Origin about the upcoming Orion mission. And you were having this very detailed discussion about, like, where is the water and should you land on this equator and what are the material properties of certain volcanic things for habitats? And I'm like, wait, these people, they're turning this science fiction into reality.
I totally remember that morning, and my knowledge base is very wide but super shallow. And a conversation like that about space just draws me in, and I'm ready to geek out for hours.
Yes. Well, I am very excited. We're going back to space. The Orion mission is real, and this is another example. The Village are coming together on the mission.
Yeah, we're going back to the moon and beyond. It has been 50 years since we've gone there. It's high time that we went back.
High time. Very excited by this mission. By the way, I am now done with my mission. I leave you all in the great hands of Adam Savage. So great to see you again.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
bye.
Another round of applause. Oh, this week is going to be memorable. You know when you're doing a really deep research dive and you open up the spigot of information and it's like a fire hose just going past your brain. You're taking it all in, you don't know how to quantize it at all, and then at a certain point in the deluge, some little mailbox flag goes off in your head and you go, wait a minute, I might actually understand some portion of this. The endorphin rush that you get at that second, which I'm still chasing my whole life, that endorphin rush is what this week is entirely about. You're going to leave with more questions than you arrived with, but that's right and proper because questions are where the action is at. If there's one thing I've learned about institutional knowledge, it's not about knowledge of facts, it's about knowledge of exactly what the right question to ask is. And we have a crazy cool lineup of speakers for you this evening. Get ready to be floored by unique perspectives of the Mars domains, from exciting new developments happening today to unbelievable achievements happening in the surprisingly near future. First up, Brent Sherwood from Blue Origin is going to tell us about the new space stations that they're designing for commercial activities. I'm just wondering if they have a hotel up there, can I get a late checkout time? Then Dr. Shahini Ghose will brave the inescapably weird quantum reality of atoms and photons and tell us how quantum physics can be harnessed to transform computation as we know it today. Dr. James Crawford of Orbital Insight will walk us through the ways AI, machine learning, and geospatial analytics are helping to streamline operations in areas like defense, intelligence, consumer goods, and supply chains. Jesse Levinson from Zoox will show us how their fully autonomous, impossibly cute all-electric vehicles, sorry for calling them cute, are providing safe mobility as a service, bringing an entirely new experience for riders. And last but not least, theoretical physicist, best-selling author, science correspondent, and radio host Michio Kaku is going to investigate some of the most pressing topics in science today and explore exciting theories that could help us unlock some of the deepest scientific mysteries. So, without further ado, let's get started. Please welcome with me to the stage Brent Sherwood, Senior Vice President of Advanced Development Programs for Blue Origin.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to ReMars. We're going to start with the S in Mars. And as Ray Bradbury taught us many years ago, S is for space. So we'll be thinking big. I'd like to talk with you about activities and products and services and systems in space that are coming this decade, within just a couple of years. This is not concept, this is real. It's also not about machines and data doing amazing things in remote places in space. This is about people in space, bringing people into space, and what that will mean for us. This is what the future of human spaceflight was supposed to be. When I was born, same year as NASA, this is essentially what we thought the future would look like. I grew up in the 60s with Apollo and Star Trek and 2001, A Space Odyssey. And we all knew that there would be moon bases, hotels in orbit, cities on Mars. Hasn't happened yet. Some of us have been working for decades to make it happen. Today we're going to talk a little bit about why it hasn't and the fact that now it's about to. It starts with Earth. I'm sure you all think space is cool. It's much more than just cool. I would argue it's existentially important for the future of civilization. We evolved on and live on a vast planet that's wrapped by an extremely thin and vulnerable biosphere. And that biosphere has a finite carrying capacity. We don't know what that carrying capacity is. Population, industrial utilization. Maybe it's 15 billion people, twice what we have today. Maybe it's 10 billion, much closer to what we have today. Maybe it's 5 billion. Maybe we've already exceeded the carrying capacity of the biosphere, as we see in increasing environmental devastation and the existence of the sixth major extinction event that this planet has seen in its history, which we have created and are perpetuating. There are two paths from our state into the future. One is what Jeff Bezos calls rationing, stasis and rationing. That means allocating and sub-allocating in a probably very controversial and conflict-ridden way, increasingly limited resources to an increasing population, which is increasingly hungry for technological advancement. The other route is to unlimited growth. And the only way to do that is to open the infinite resources and infinite volume of space. There are only those two choices. We at Blue Origin favor the second path, and so we're working hard to try to build a future in which millions of people can live and work in space to benefit Earth. To get there, we have to go through what we call two gates. This is the only way we can break out of the limitations, the physical limitations, the energetic limitations that we have in this thin biosphere on Earth. The first gate is significant, dramatic reduction in the cost of getting into space and moving around in space, where we want, when we want. And to do that, Blue Origin and others are developing fully reusable systems, so we don't throw away the rockets and the spacecraft after we use them. This is a hard problem, but it's solvable, it's operationalizable, and that's what's happening right now. The other gate comes later, and that is opening the resources of space. You have to do both. We have to be able to get there inexpensively, and we have to be able to use what's there. And then we can unlock the future of humanity throughout the solar system. So, if this is so important, why hasn't it happened yet? Why is it not happening more aggressively now? Well, the world we live in is extremely different from the world of Apollo when I was a kid. Back then, we had the high priests of technology, white lab coats, pocket protectors, horn-rimmed glasses, and they were treated with respect by newscasters and the public. Think of how different today's world is. A highly cynical population, very young population. Billions of people with access to information and disinformation with just a tap or a click. We see the continued effects of environmental devastation, the impoverishment of the biosphere as our legacy to future generations. And we now also see the ability of individuals to commit what we could call antisocial decisions or actions because they have their hand on the levers of tremendous power. As expensive as we think gas may be today, we actually are spoiled by cheap petroleum. We don't pay the full cost of petroleum, digging up these ancient forests, burning them, putting it in the atmosphere, CO2 going into the ocean, warming the planet, and changing everything about our biosphere. But while we're still spoiled by cheap petroleum, we also have access to space. And while the spending power of NASA is only 1/5 what it was at the peak of Apollo, we also have access to immense amounts of private capital. So can we think differently and weave these threads together, the realities of today, into the prescription for a program that moves us forward into the future? I use this model to think about what humans are good for in space. And in 60 years of reading and studying ideas and working with ideas that people have had, I've yet to come across one potential use of human spaceflight that does not trace to one or more of these four futures. They're very different. They require different types of technologies, different investment focus, different systems. They're not all interchangeable. So it's important, if we're going to invest, that we know where we're aiming, what we're investing in, and why. The four futures can work together, but they're not interchangeable. If all we do is explore, we'll never occupy space. Exploring is looking over the next hill, seeing what's there, mapping it out, studying it, understanding how it works, reporting back, for example. That's exploring. To explore well or thoroughly or inspiringly, we need to reach out very far. We need to find things that are genuinely new. Expanding is different. That means putting down roots, learning how to live, raising families, which in turn means emplacing all of the aspects of civilization that characterize our world. Now, on Earth, expansion can follow exploration directly because we can breathe the air and drink the water, and the climate is temperate. There is air, for example. We can till the soil, we can farm the oceans, we can mine for minerals. In space, just to be requires building. It's not developing land that we find, it's developing the land and then improving it for human use. So that's harder. This is a bridge too far. No amount of government-funded exploration is going to enable human expansion into the solar system. There's too much else to do. So what's the solution? I think it's the other two futures. I think they are the bridge. Exploit and experience are the bridge from exploring to expanding because they are not constrained by government budgets. They are ways to access sources of capital outside the top-line budget constraint of federal appropriations. And you see just conceptual examples here. When we experience, we go, we pay, right? That's our own resource that we're spending. When we exploit, as a company, we're investing, expecting to make a return. We're investing our shareholders' money in order to get a return. These are economic engines, and they're the only way that we can bridge from exploring to expanding. The futures are connected. So I'll talk for a moment about exploring and what we're doing today. NASA has the Artemis program. We're getting back to the moon to stay, learn how to put down roots and develop things there. The moon is very close, 4 days away. doesn't take much more time to get to the moon from Florida than it does to get to Antarctica from Las Vegas. And it's as big as a continent. It's as big as Africa. Lots to explore, no native populations and no native ecosystem. So this is where we will learn how to develop the resources of space. But doing the moon is much harder than anything we've done in space so far. So for example, here's the International Space Station. Humankind's most impressive peacetime technological achievement. At root, though, as impressive as it is, it's really just a couple of things. A way to get up into space and back, a way to get power in and heat out, which is most of what you see in this image of the International Space Station, and a tiny little cluster of modules, a warren of modules, which together have about as much volume inside as a 777. Now think about doing that same thing on the moon. We still need those same three things. You got to get up into space and back. You have to get power in and heat out. You have to have a place to live and work. You have to have the lunar versions of those things, which are different from the ones for space stations. And you need a big system to get to the moon and back from the Earth. You need a big system to get down to the surface and back up. And you need all that stuff to drive around, mobility, construction, playing in the dirt, learning how to extract valuable things from the resources we find there. That's all hard. Now, the space station took the combined efforts of 16 leading spacefaring nations 30 years. Getting that type of capability on the moon is not going to be fast or cheap. But it is where we will start to learn how to open the exploit future. Let's talk about the other bridge, which is the experience future. How would our world be different if 10,000 ordinary humans flew in space every year, experiencing what we call the overview effect? The drama of the flight, high acceleration, vibration, noise, the thrill of that flight, the incomparable experience of free fall, sustained free fall in microgravity, which cannot be replicated on Earth, and the unbelievable view out the window, the most poignant view in the solar system, which changes all the time due to lighting and clouds and so forth. That's a marketable experience, and we're at the cusp of being able to see how this market will grow. What will happen in our future when spaceflight becomes normalized through the experience future, as it also becomes an engine for growth of space activity? So, Blue Origin is committed to this future of millions of people living and working in space to benefit Earth, and one of our flagship programs is what we call Orbital Reef. We formed a partnership with Sierra Space, another privately funded aerospace prime company, and together with them and our teammates, including Boeing and Redwire, Amazon, AWS, and Arizona State University, we are building, not designing or conceiving, we are building today an end-to-end service capability for commercializing low Earth orbit. That includes the rocket, 2 different versions of transfer vehicles to ride on the rocket, and all the destination systems for a space station like you see in the image here. This will lower the bar for multiple industries to participate in space in a way that has never been able to happen before. So think of Orbital Reef as a mixed-use business park, taking full advantage of this incredible location just 400 kilometers above our head. It separates the tenant uses from the space vehicle operations, which decouples the business cases of the owner-operator from the business cases of the tenants. That lowers the bar for everybody, just like in mixed-use developments on Earth. Each core increment, you see 3 in this image here, adds capacity for 10 people. By broadening the market and lowering the bar, we will unleash whatever can be unleashed in commercial development of low Earth orbit. The system has a zoned architecture, even from the start. You don't sleep in the laboratory on Orbital Reef, you sleep in a dormitory, or a hotel, or a condo. Special purpose modules off to the sides are optimized for those users, those tenants, and their business cases. We're developing a new space architecture for Orbital Reef. This is not like living inside a VCR. This is living in space the way we always thought it should be. Incredible blue marble of Earth becomes the sky canopy, viewed through the largest windows ever flown in space. 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every day. A main street with storefronts on the side. A familiar architectural type. Living spaces designed for living and entertainment and recreation. Tourist-safe excursions in little mini spacecraft rather than dangerous and difficult and bulky and painful spacesuits. And a proliferation of purpose-built modules to explore various business cases. We are pre-selling now. All of the systems you've seen in the last few minutes are in development, in prototype and proto-flight and some flight hardware already. All three vehicles will be flying within the next 2 years. So by the end of this decade, you could go to Orbital Reef and try your vision and your business and see. We'll be able to experiment with industrial applications, entertainment, gaming, sports, tourism, and all the things you can think of that might occur in a more robust ecosystem in space. So we're literally building the reef to build out the ecosystem. Nobody knows how fast the human spaceflight economy is going to grow in Earth orbit. But with Orbital Reef, we're going to find out. Thank you.
Please welcome physicist, author, and founding director of the Laurier Center for Women in Science, Shohini Ghosh.
Thank you. And I'm going to jump right in because I have so much to tell you. And I'm going to start by showing you this image of an ancient book from India. It's very famous, and I'm sure you've heard of it, but you're not going to be able to recognize it right away because I have encrypted the title by replacing every single letter in the title with a different letter. So I invite you to try to decrypt the title and figure out what this book is. It's a book from ancient India, very famous. Shout it out, don't be shy. Many of you have gone in a particular direction. And in fact, you would indeed be right if you guessed the Kama Sutra, so well done. So I'm sure you've heard of this book. Raise your hands if you have. If you haven't, it's a self-help manual. But in this book, actually, there's a chapter which describes how couples can secretly communicate with each other using exactly the encryption cipher I just described. So this may be the very first description of encryption in history, and that's why the Kama Sutra really should be famous. These days, we don't actually use this kind of a cipher because it's very easy to crack it. We have computers. We use much harder mathematical problems for encryption. For example, we look at factoring of large numbers. Here's a number for you to try to crack, but I don't recommend you trying this unless you have a supercomputer. So just to save time, I'm just going to give you the answer for this particular math problem. Here it is. I'm sure you would have guessed that. But the point here is that if you have a number that's maybe 260 digits or more, even supercomputers find it very hard to crack this. And that's useful because today's encryption methods that we use actually are based on the fact that this factoring problem is very difficult. So if you are sending some kind of an encrypted message and a hacker wants to actually steal your information, they would have to know how to solve factoring, and then they would be able to access your data. So that's pretty good because it's a pretty hard problem. But I worry. What if there's some whiz kid out there, you know, the one who knows all the digits of pi and, you know, can solve problems really fast and puzzles? What if she goes and figures out how to do factoring? Then we'll all be in big trouble. And even if the whiz kid doesn't do it, we actually already know that there exists a method to actually crack the factoring problem if we use entirely different computers, which I want to tell you more about today. And those are the computers of the future, which we call quantum computers. And these computers are wonderfully powerful, potentially cracking factoring as well as all kinds of other potential applications, because they are not just one more faster chip that we use even today. They are based on an entirely different framework of computing that harnesses the laws of quantum physics, which, as you may have heard, are very peculiar laws. For example, if you have a quantum particle such as an electron or a photon, which is a particle of light, if you want to know precisely every single property of that particle all at the same time, you just won't be able to do it. That's what we call quantum uncertainty. So, for example, if you want to precisely measure the position of the electron perfectly, you can do that. But then you wouldn't know anything about its direction or its speed of motion, its momentum. And if you want to know everything about its momentum, you wouldn't know about its position. Not because your devices are not good enough, it's because it's built into the theory itself. It is fundamentally unknowable, which is really weird, of course, and perhaps tells us that maybe we can't do precision computing. But in fact, the really revolutionary idea is that for computing, embracing uncertainty can actually be a very powerful thing, so that it's actually a feature, not a bug. In the language of computing, as you all know, everything is based on a very simple framework, 0 and 1, binary digits, bits. But in the quantum computing world, we use the language of probabilities to embrace uncertainty. So there's some probability that a quantum bit, which is a qubit, is in the state 0, and some probability that it is a 1, and we don't know. And that's okay. That's what we call quantum superposition. Again, imprecision seems like a strange thing to use for computing. But really what we're doing is we're expanding the landscape of computing and going from just restricting ourselves to 2 points, 0 and 1, to an entire beautiful new boundary that we can explore. And it becomes even more interesting when we go to more than 1 qubit. When 2 or more qubits interact, they can get locked together in a kind of wonderful but peculiar handshake, so that individually each of these quantum particles can still be uncertain and fluid in a superposition of 0 and 1, but jointly the 2 qubits are perfectly in sync, so that when one of the qubits is measured to be a 0, the other one will instantly be a 1, no matter where they are in the universe. So this magical balance of certainty and uncertainty is what we call quantum entanglement. And it doesn't exist in our everyday computers today. But it's now an extra knob in that expanded quantum computing framework that we can use to build better, more powerful algorithms. So playing in this beautiful landscape of probabilities, the trick is to try to figure out how to travel the probability world in such a way that we can make the probability of the right answer for whatever task you're doing, make that grow, and the probability of the wrong answer to decrease. And in fact, it is indeed possible in this larger framework of computing. And this is something that eventually led scientists to realize that in this framework, we can actually build algorithms that can do that factoring problem. So now we'd all be in trouble, because in the future, if such a computer is built, all of our encryption is going to be completely vulnerable. However, quantum also offers us a way out. What if we could use quantum to fight quantum hacking? And in fact, this is possible, again, by understanding and embracing quantum uncertainty. For example, if we took quantum bits, qubits, and encoded our secret information in those qubits, or maybe use it to build a key that we then use to encode our information, then if there is a hacker out there who wants to copy the information secretly and then decrypt it, they wouldn't be able to copy the key because uncertainty and superposition. There is no way that the hacker can precisely copy perfectly every part of your quantum bit. And that is a kind of encryption that is not based on mathematical problems like factoring. So no matter how complicated the problem is, it doesn't matter. No matter how smart that WizKid is, it doesn't matter. No matter how much computing power you have, it doesn't matter. Why? Because this encryption relies on the laws of quantum physics, the laws of the universe. So hackers would have to violate the laws of physics to be able to crack your code. So that's a very powerful kind of encryption process. And there's much more to this, the potential of quantum computing in this bigger framework. I want to describe a bit about this. It all sounds like science fiction, I know. But in fact, just recently, China launched a satellite, a quantum satellite, which is capable of generating pairs of entangled photons, which are particles of light, and sending them to stations on Earth separated by about 1,000 kilometers. And these entangled particles can be tested to see if they're really entangled, and then they can be used to develop exactly the kind of quantum encrypted keys that I just described. And this could become the basis of a future quantum internet as more of these satellites and a quantum infrastructure can be laid out. And that could actually lead to even more science fiction applications, such as quantum teleportation. Not of humans, but I'm not making this up. It is actually possible to teleport, not humans, but quantum information from one location to another. And it's already been demonstrated in the lab. Now, a lot of this kind of applications and testing is happening in research groups around the world, and it's still at the prototype level. However, even though we don't have large-scale quantum computers, these small-scale prototypes already offer quantum advantages. So in my own research team, we also actually do this kind of testing and benchmarking by accessing quantum computers on the cloud. For example, we did a small test where we simulated a task involving 3 parties that have to make a joint decision about something. And they are connected, but during the decision making, they cannot actually communicate. So if they try to just make the best guess without any communication and using just regular computers, then they have a success rate of about 75%, which is shown as a blue curve here. But if they are allowed to use entanglement, which is what we simulated using the quantum computer, then their theoretically predicted success rate would actually be 100%. But when we actually ran this on a real quantum computer, the data you see is the purple curve, which is not quite at the theoretical white 100% level, but it is higher than the blue curve. And this is the reason it's not quite at 100% is because there's errors in these small-scale quantum computers, because these are very fragile devices. They operate at temperatures that are colder than outer space. So even the slightest bit of heat is like noise. And that's what you're seeing here. But in spite of that, you clearly see that there's an advantage in this very small-scale, simple test that we can do. Even my students can run this on the quantum computer. And that's very exciting, because the next steps would be to improve on this and expand and eventually perhaps develop really large-scale quantum computers. And if we can do that, then there's a potential to impact many, many areas. So I've already described for you a little bit about the possibility of building a quantum internet, the communication application. On the computing side, it's equally exciting, because Certain kinds of problems, such as if you want to calculate all of the properties of, let's say, a molecule consisting of individual atoms and all of the electrons, these are quantum particles. Therefore, using a quantum computer to actually simulate and calculate that would be much more efficient than what we do now with our regular computers. And that could lead to better drug development, maybe smart materials, better solar cells, and who knows, we don't even know all the possible applications that are out there. The other thing that I want to mention is that entanglement offers a way to do high precision sensing that can beat the current limits of our sensors, and that too has many applications in many fields, as I'm sure you will agree. Design is also really important because, as I said, these materials, as we develop them and improve them, we can cut down on the cost and the energy requirements for these kinds of applications. But for me personally, the thing that really excites me is just the science itself. Because as we use these computers more and more, we're going to understand their advantages and their limitations. And that's telling us, what does it mean to talk about a quantum versus a regular world that we live in. So we're learning about the fundamental laws of nature and what we mean by saying, what is quantum about quantum? So to me, that's the most exciting piece. And many research teams, just like my own, are working on the problem, and this is growing, in fact, exponentially around the world. Governments as well as private sector investors are very interested in this industry. In fact, the last year, there was more investment in quantum than all of the previous years combined. And that's exciting because, as you see, the potential is huge if we ever build these quantum computers. They're going to impact society in multiple ways, from healthcare to energy use to climate change to who knows what else. And that means all of society may change. There may be a real revolution that started as an idea, now leading to all of this technology, and then who knows what in the future for our society. And when we talk about society, that brings up questions of who is developing this technology and who will benefit from it and what will we use it for. So I want to finish by showing you a favorite photo of mine. Here it is. I don't know if you can guess who these women are, but I will tell you, all the women in this photo are physicists. Isn't that amazing? So I love this. Yeah. This photo was actually taken at a conference gathering together women physicists from over 50 countries. And in fact, there's talent and curiosity and energy all around the world. Imagine if we could harness all of that and really have everybody contribute and benefit from this coming quantum revolution. That's the revolution that I want to be a part of. Thank you.
Please welcome the founder, chairman, and chief technology officer at Orbital Insight, Dr. James Crawford.
So good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the folks at Amazon for inviting me to speak, and thank all of you for taking some time out of your day to listen. So we live in a changing world. Who of us would have thought 3 years ago that we would have been facing a global pandemic where we all had to stay in our homes for a year, couldn't leave, or that we would be in the middle of the largest conflict in Europe since World War II, or that the US and the rest of the world would be staring down a possible recession. And then on top of that, we have the reality of climate change, which introduces a whole nother level of uncertainty. The strange thing about it is that these changes appear to be both increasingly rapid and increasingly chaotic, hard to predict. And indeed, if you listen to the folks on the Sunday TV shows, the talking heads on TV, and they'll talk to you with great certainty about what's going to happen in the next week and the next month, and then you listen to them a week later and they'll tell you something completely different. Now, at the same time, we also live in a world of It's more censored than ever before. It's better instrumented than ever before. The number of satellites we have orbiting the Earth, we now have hundreds of satellites orbiting the Earth, looking at the Earth in multiple spectral bands, drones in the sky. We have AIS on every plane, AIS on every ship, ADS-B on every plane. We have anonymized cell phone data from billions of cell phones, billions of pings. A cell phone was here at this time, a car was here at this time. But what is that data telling us? Why, with all of that data, don't we know that we're going into recession? Why don't we know where deforestation is occurring and how it's occurring and how to stop it? You know, if you think about the days of science fiction, if the Starship Enterprise goes into orbit around a planet, Kirk turns to Spock and says, tell me about the planet. And Spock will immediately look in his little device and he will say, well, there's 2 continents, there's about 5 billion entities living there. And based on the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, they seem to be in the late industrial pre-fusion age. How does he do that? How does that little device do that when the Enterprise has been in orbit around that planet for about 5 minutes? More importantly, how could we do that? Because that is what we need to understand our world and to understand it in real time so that we can manage our world properly and manage our resources, manage our economy, manage social and environmental change and challenges. The reality is that the answers to the questions we need answers to are hidden behind the pixels. So we have all of these images coming down, essentially the whole Earth every day. But if you wanted to look at the whole Earth every day, you would need 8 million people doing nothing all day, every day, but staring at satellite images. The world is just really, really big. And indeed, if you wanted to, let's say you really wanted to understand corn yield, and you wanted to be able to predict how much corn the US was going to grow this year, and you said, I'm going to spend the rest of the summer driving the fields of Illinois and Indiana and Iowa and looking at the cornfield, so I'm going to know how much corn the US is going to produce. You would see in that period of time about 0.1% of all the cornfields in the US. Similarly, if you said, I want to know if we're going into a recession, and you started visiting all the factories, all the mills, all the mines, all the shopping centers, you would see 0.1 or less % of all of those, even in the US, and have no idea whether or not we're going into a recession. The problems are simply too big for the human eye. They're too big for the human brain and too big for the human eye. So what we are about at Orbital Insight is augmenting that human insight, augmenting that human intelligence with the AI needed and the cloud computing needed to actually work at a global scale. To be able to take in aerial imagery, satellite imagery, drone imagery, as well as the Internet of Things data, the ship tracking data, the plane tracking data, the anonymized cell phone pings, the connected car data, and apply that data to understanding real problems, to understanding problems in supply chain management, to understanding problems in what's going to be in your grocery store, and what's going on in the ports, and what's going on with deforestation. And this gives you the visibility into things that you can't see. It lets you look not just at the pixels, but be able to see a forest, to be able to see all the forests, to be able to see the lakes and understanding the lake levels, to be able to comprehend that by augmenting your intelligence and our analysts' intelligence with AI, to be able to understand that at a national and at a global scale. So the kinds of problems we're then interested in are things like supply chain traceability. So understanding if you buy a granola bar, obviously if you had a choice and you were sitting in the shopping at a grocery store and there were 2 granola bars in front of you, you would buy the one that didn't cause deforestation in Indonesia, right? Pretty much anybody would, but how do you know? Even if you are the maker of that granola bar, how do you know that you're not causing deforestation in Indonesia? If you trace down that supply chain for palm oil, it eventually traces down tree-like out to about 1 million different smallholder farms across Indonesia and other parts of the world. Any or all of those might be causing deforestation. Most are not. Right? Most of those farmers are well-intentioned, they follow good practices, they work within regions where the palm oil plants have been established for years and are managed responsibly. Some are not. How do you know, though, when the supply chain is that big? We have the ability now, using IoT, using geospatial analysis, to trace back the supply chain all the way to that level, aggregate it up and say, okay, we are going to certify these granola bars, we're going to certify these products as being environmentally responsible. Similarly, as you've noticed, we're having a lot of shortages. First it was toilet paper, and then later it was baby food. At some point it was chicken. So because of COVID, because of the war in the Ukraine, because of general chaos in our world, supply chains are not always dependable. And the challenge isn't, if you're, let's say you're running that Ford F-150 plant, the challenge isn't your tier 1 suppliers. The challenge is the magnesium part that's needed to hook the alternator onto the engine block. You can't get that because the magnesium plant burned down because they had a fire because magnesium is highly flammable. So it's your tier 3, tier 4 suppliers that have a problem, and then suddenly you have to shut down your Ford F-150 plant. But since we now have the ability, or we're building the ability with geospatial analysis and these huge volumes of data to track thousands and tens of thousands of factories and farms and mills and mines, we can actually understand that complete supply chain, track all of the suppliers at all tiers, and give the supply chain operators the visibility that, oh, there's going to be a problem with this magnesium part, you better line up alternative suppliers. A lot of that goes through things like ports. So the amount of material that flows through a port like the Port of LA, Port of San Francisco, Port of Seattle, or the New York on the East Coast is huge. And all of those ports are impacted by COVID. They're all impacted by changes in what's going on in China. China is still much more on lockdown than COVID. You know, today if you try to travel to Japan, you require a visa to get in. You have to prove that you're there on a business purpose. So we are not integrated in the same way we were pre-COVID. So the ports become often the first place you understand that you have a supply chain problem. But we can see the ships in the sea. We can see where they are docked. We can see the shipping containers on the docks and understand what's going on to make sure that we have visibility into those supply chains, even when they grow internationally. Finally, if you are, let's say you're an investor and you want to invest in let's say you want to invest in an office building in downtown Detroit, you'd like to know a lot of things before you made that investment. Are the factories back up? Are they making cars and trucks? Are they getting completely killed by Tesla and they're not making cars and trucks anymore? How many shifts are they running? What's the demand? How many people are working from home? How many people are back in the office? So if you're an investor or an insurance company or a bank, you want to understand what's going on with real property, and you want to understand what's going on in shopping centers, what's going on in office buildings. All of that we can get by appropriately analyzing the geospatial data. Now let's look at one very specific example that was quite dramatic a few months ago and still ongoing, is in an ongoing way. When the Russians invaded the Ukraine, we were able to track the refugee crisis starting out of Kharkiv, which was one of the major cities in the Ukraine that was most effective because it's in the eastern part of the country. We were literally able to watch on a day-by-day basis, an hourly basis, the number of devices through anonymized cell phone pings and through satellite imagery, the number of devices and the number of people leaving Kharkiv. And not only the fact that they were leaving, but we were able to see where they were going. We were able to track the lines of movement as people left initially right after the invasion. They were near Kharkiv, and then gradually they spread mostly into the western parts of the country. And then out of the country, we could see the border crossings. The border crossings actually lit up without even having to know where they are, looking on maps or something. The border crossings lit up in our charts. We were able to see the border crossings and then see people going to Warsaw, people going to Bucharest and other parts of Europe. Turning into refugees. And this is important not only to understand the social and environmental impacts of a crisis like this and understand where to direct aid, understand the real impact of these kind of conflicts. We can also look more directly at military questions. For instance, in the Syrian conflict, there was a point in time when the airfields that were previously civilian started to move over to being military. And our computer vision algorithms, which run all in the cloud, we're able to run at very large scale, over thousands and thousands of images, are able to actually tell the difference between civilian planes and military planes, and indeed within military planes, the difference between different kinds of military planes. We were literally able to watch the airports convert from civilian to military as we saw fewer and fewer civilian planes, fewer and fewer cars in the parking lots where the people would have parked to take flights, and more military vehicles. And looking more closely at different kinds of military vehicles, we're able to look at the concentration of different kinds of planes in different bases. Now, this is something a human could do. The problem is that there are just too many military bases and there's too much imagery. And we can take every military base, every day, every kind of plane, every kind of truck, every kind of military vehicle. And in this case, at the Quezon Air Base near Taipei, we were able to see for the first time J-20s, which is the Chinese equivalent of a stealth fighter, suddenly showing up at this base in Taipei where they had never been before. And that's the kind of pattern we're looking for to understand changes in the world and changes in the deployment of forces around the world. And you think about this running at scale, think about every military base, every factory, every farm, really starting to light that up and understand the world in ways we never had before. Indeed, the mission statement of the company of Orbital Insight is to understand what we're doing on into the Earth and make that information available to decision makers. So in this case, we counted over 53,000 aircraft using over 2,000 satellite images. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that cloud computing is so important for us. We would not be able to stand up, as a startup, we would not be able to stand up enough GPUs to suddenly process 2,000 satellite images. But since we're doing cloud computing, we can stand up as many GPUs as we want, process as many images as our customer wants to see for some particular Go project, and then turn those GPUs loose after we're done with them. And let somebody else make use of them. So think about now what this means to different kinds of decision makers. So if you're a supply chain manager, you want to know whether your supply is safe, whether or not the raw materials that you need for your factory are still available out to tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. We give you the ability to monitor that supply chain. If you're a consumer, or indeed if you're an environmentally responsible consumer goods company, you want to understand the true sourcing of your raw materials and the true impact of that sourcing, all the way back to which farm, which smallholder farm did this palm oil or cocoa or coffee beans come from, and is that farm engaged in deforestation? Has that farm been managed responsibly for the last decade? If you are looking at, say, a hurricane, this middle chart here is looking at the effects of a hurricane. As global events, global climate events get more and more extreme, we're able to look at the building destruction. So basically look at a before and after image, run the computer vision algorithm on the before and the after, and we can immediately tell you which buildings have been damaged in a serious way by the hurricane. So helping with climate change, helping with environment, helping with recovery from major events, helping with supply chains, helping with environmental sustainability. And then, as I mentioned before, helping with investment as well, helping understand where shipping containers are in the world, how that's changed, how the shipping lanes are moving, how much grain is still coming out of the Ukraine, and where is it being replaced from, if it's being replaced, how much oil is still being produced. Most oil is stored and floating in oil tanks, and we can actually look in satellite imagery at the height of those lids and understand, are the Saudis pumping more oil to try to make up for the shortages of Russian oil? Are the Russians still pumping oil and storing it and floating their oil tanks, or have they slowed down their pumping now that they can't sell it in Europe? All of these are really important questions for managing the world's supply of energy and other critical raw materials, especially, as I say, in the face of an increasingly chaotic world order. So what this all means is that by taking geospatial data, of which we now have an abundance, thanks to the lower and lower cost of getting satellites into Earth orbit, and the other IoT data that we have, plus the artificial intelligence to run computer vision algorithms and data science algorithms and make sense of that data, we're able to take these two together and work at scale to give insights about the world. And that is what we do at Orbital Insight. Thank you all for listening.
Please welcome the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder at Zoox, Jesse Levinson.
Hey, thanks for having me here today. So my co-founder and I had a unique vision when we started Zoox in 2014. And our idea was to create a purpose-built, fully autonomous vehicle designed for riders instead of drivers, and to deploy them in fleets so that we could sell rides instead of selling entire cars. At the time, many people thought we were nuts, and they might have had a point, but when we looked at the current state of transportation, we wondered why everyone accepted that things had to be this way. So most horrifying is that globally, car crashes kill well over 1 million people a year, and that's actually more than, well, almost 4,000 people every single day, which is several times worse than COVID these days. It also turns out that we only use our cars about 4% of the time, which means that they're just sitting idle and depreciating the other 96% of the time. So they're incredibly wasteful, economically, but also environmentally, because not only does driving a car create pollution, but building a car is not so great either. There's a lot of stuff in cars, as it turns out. Next, A third of city traffic is caused by people searching for parking, which doesn't just suck for the people looking for parking, it makes congestion worse for everyone else too. Now, back to pollution. A quarter of the air pollution in the US is caused by transportation. And finally, we collectively spend 400 billion hours driving each year. So even conservatively, that's trillions of dollars of wasted time every year. So hopefully it's pretty clear that making and selling lots of cars isn't great. And while electrifying them is mostly a good thing, that only makes the situation marginally better. We're going a lot further than that. What makes Zoox unique is that we've been working on a ground-up, purpose-built design from the first day we started the company, almost 8 years ago. Now, we're finally starting to see some of our competitors acknowledge that purpose-built hardware is the optimal solution, but most players in this space are still focused on retrofitting conventional vehicles with sensors and other advanced hardware. And even the supposedly ground-up robotaxis that other companies have pre-announced are actually built on top of conventional car chassis. So they're missing a lot of the unique advantages we built into Zoox, like bidirectionality, four-wheel steering, and a ton of safety and redundancy features. So our view is that the full realization of autonomous mobility requires a vehicle that is purpose-built for AI to drive and humans to enjoy. And that's exactly what we're building. A lot of the work is creating the AI software and making sure it's safe enough. But the best way to ensure it's possible is to give ourselves major advantages in the hardware, like sensor pods on the top 4 corners of the vehicle that can see absolutely everything. Here's a slide that our CEO, Aisha Evans, shared at Remars back in 2019. It's actually from our original pitch deck when we founded Zoox in 2014. And we think it's a great visual summary of how we look at the opportunity. We didn't think this was an exaggeration then, and we're even more sure it's spot on now. So today, I'm excited to share more about how our vehicle works and some of the progress we've made in the last few years. Here's what a Zoox looks like in its natural habitat. We revealed the world's first purpose-built operational robotaxi in December 2020. It's capable of driving up to 75 miles per hour in both directions. And we didn't just show a prototype, we actually showed it driving. This is us driving in downtown San Francisco, but we did have to close the roads off to the public and only interact with Zoox agents. And the reason was that even though we had almost all of the functionality we needed to drive autonomously, we were still progressing against our safety case, which is how we can quantitatively demonstrate our safety even amongst the chaos and uncertainty of the real world. Since that time, we've advanced our urban driving capabilities, taking the learnings to our ground-up vehicle to validate our safety case so that we can prove we drive significantly safer than a human driver. One of the most important developments in the last few years is that when we test our L3 vehicles in dense cities like San Francisco, Seattle, and right here in Las Vegas, they now make significantly fewer mistakes than even attentive human drivers, and that's a big deal. It doesn't mean that we handle every single possible scenario better yet, and we are still working on some of the toughest corner cases, but it's an important metric and it's great progress. These videos show some of the complicated scenes we handle autonomously day in and day out. And it's particularly cool to see the full 3D sensor fusion output while we drive. As far as I know, we're still the only company that releases this level of perception output. And we've been doing it for a few years now if you want to check out our YouTube channel. Let's talk more about the technical challenge of teaching a robot to drive. Before the vehicle can plan its trajectory, it needs to know what's going on around it, which is called perception, and then what other agents are likely to do, which is called prediction. As I've mentioned, we want to give ourselves the best possible chance of knowing exactly what's happening. Early attempts at autonomous vehicles focused on retrofitting conventional cars with sensor suites as a way to fast-track their way to commercialization. And while it's definitely possible to get a reasonable degree of functionality with something like the car on the left, we actually are much more into what's on the right. We are very confident that the optimal approach requires what's on the right. Besides the suboptimal customer experience, especially if there's a creepy, disembodied steering wheel kind of just moving by itself, the actual shape of a car just isn't optimized for AI vision. you can see that there's a hood sticking out in the front. And while it's possible to add even more sensors to the hood, which gives you some visibility when there's unprotected cross traffic, at best they're at waist level, which means they definitely don't have the best possible view of the world. So we've optimized perception by designing a vehicle with the ideal sensor placement and maximum redundancy. Our vehicle is symmetrical, with each top corner featuring a custom sensor pod, which gives us 270 degrees field of view on each corner. And the really cool thing about this architecture is that if you can see at least one corner of the vehicle, you know that it can see you. Now we're going to have a pop quiz at the end of the talk to make sure you've all memorized the locations of all 40 of our sensors. Or we can skip that. But hopefully, this gives you a quick indication of how well we can perceive the world around us. And in short, this architecture gives us a 360-degree view with overlapping redundancy, both per and across sensor modalities. And it lets us see at least 150 meters in all directions, and even more in the forward and rear directions. So why do we need multiple kinds of sensors? It's an important question. Why don't we just use cameras, which are the most similar to human vision? After all, people drive with our eyes, and so why aren't cameras enough? Well, first of all, computer vision just hasn't caught up with human vision yet. Humans are still much, much better at figuring out what objects are and whether there's something there at all. Deep learning is kind of sort of catching up, but not really and not particularly quickly, as it turns out. Second of all, cameras, like eyes, do not do so well when the sun is shining directly into them. And so when we're driving, we can actually move our head around, and we can even hold our hand up to block the sun. But of course, our cameras don't have that particular skill. Here's an example where we're looking into the sun, and our cameras do decently well. We can make out some pedestrians on the corner, and on the right, we see the top-down sensor fusion view, where they're shown as pink circles. So we do okay with cameras, even looking into the sun, right? Well, what's harder to see is there are actually a couple more pedestrians on the other side of the street, and the glare from the sun is completely washing them out. So our vision algorithms are failing to detect these pedestrians. My guess is that you would too. Looking at the raw camera data, which we're showing zoomed in here, it's essentially impossible to tell that there are two people in that crop. Fortunately, when you look at the view from the AI's full sensor fusion, we do detect the pedestrians, but we're detecting them with LiDAR and not with cameras. Here's another example. Pedestrians at night have a lower signal-to-noise ratio and are more difficult to see. This is just basic physics. When there's not as much light, images are noisier and or blurrier, and you've noticed that on your smartphone cameras. Now, these days, they all have night mode, but that requires you to stand very still while they capture a long exposure. And so that doesn't really work while we're driving around. If a pedestrian's clothing is a similar color to the car behind it, especially at night, then the contrast is poor and it's difficult to distinguish the person. Furthermore, motion blur can also degrade image quality, leading to detection failures. In theory, we could just jack up the sensitivity to detect anything that might be a person or something else. But the challenge is that doing that would lead to a significant increase in what's called false positive detections. A false positive is when the AI imagines there is something that is not really there. This is uncomfortable at best and sometimes even dangerous because the vehicle will unnecessarily slow down, unexpectedly stop, or even try to swerve around non-existent obstacles. So in order to build an autonomous system that is truly safe, we must detect everything that is there, but also know when there is nothing. Okay, so we've talked about some of the limitations of cameras, but it's not fair to just pick on cameras. LiDAR gives us a fairly dense 3D view of the world around us, and it has the wonderful property that it measures exactly how far away everything is. But to be fair, it has its issues too. And not just that the richest person in the world thinks they're too expensive. Although, serious point, it's really not that expensive when you use them in a robotaxi business model. Anyway, here we see one of our L3 vehicles driving autonomously in the rain, and on the left you can see the raw LiDAR output as well as the obstacles that our LiDAR pipeline detects in real time. Unfortunately, LiDAR often returns a signal when it hits water droplets, and a naive perception algorithm would then try to stop for rain, which would be pretty dumb. One of the cool things our perception team has figured out how to do is use the LiDAR intensity values, dual return mode, and the organic shape of water blobs to automatically filter out moisture like rain, fog, and steam from the perception output. It works really well, but it's still important to have other sensor modalities to corroborate the final output. Speaking of steam, we have a secret weapon for that too. It turns out that long-wave infrared cameras, which sense heat, can see right through steam. Here's an example of that, and it's pretty cool. You can see the steam occluding the pedestrian in the camera view, and even LiDAR wouldn't be at its best here, but the long-wave AR camera sees the person as they pass behind the steam. So worst case, even if our cameras, radars, and LiDAR all miss something, our long-wave IR cameras will pick up living things since they emit heat. Fundamentally, we just want to understand characteristics of objects around us like depth, velocity, intensity, RGB color. And so this requires a mix of multiple sensors like cameras for color sensing, radars for velocity, long-wave AR for heat, and LiDARs for depth. It's the combination of all of these sensors that gives us an unparalleled and redundant coverage of the scene. The spider graph shows how we do really well overall, even though no one individual sensor is a panacea. In addition to making sure our overall sensor modalities work well together, it's important to address redundancy and independence of the sensor pods as well so that we can maximize overall safety. Because we want to make sure that we can see objects from every single corner. So our goal is essentially to overwhelm our perception system with data so that as we then go through prediction and finally motion control, we can feel confident in our understanding of our surroundings. Then we can use simulation to further test these various modalities and evaluate them against our safety case. Here you can see how we test individual modalities in simulation and understand how they work together. Working our way from the left, we see simulated radar, and then LiDAR, and then cameras, and then finally our full sensor fusion output all the way on the right. Simulation lets us test our entire sensor suite, as well as remove an individual sensor or modality of sensor to see how the vehicle would perform in a degraded state. A huge advantage here is that even if one of our sensor simulations isn't quite perfect, the overall 3D output is still representatively accurate in terms of performance and noise models. And this also lets us run our entire AI stack in simulation, not just perception. We can then create simulated scenarios to further test and validate how the vehicle will respond to edge cases, which are those rare but complicated situations that the vehicle must be able to safely navigate. And while real-world testing is crucial, the advantage of testing in simulation is that you can run an extremely large number of scenarios, including ones that would be too dangerous to do in the real world. And you can do that quickly, precisely, and most importantly, safely. So that's all great, but how do we know when we're finally safe enough? Prior to each internal milestone, we use a fault tree, kind of like the one shown here, but this is of course a bit simplified, hope you don't mind, to predict the overall residual risk that the Zoox vehicle might introduce into a defined driving environment. Now, the overall predicted residual risk, including severity, is compared to human data, like crash, injury, and fatality rates to determine whether or not we're ready for the milestone. In addition to building safety features throughout the process, we've even added a separate system that provides a truly independent layer of oversight and control. We call it SafetyNet, and it uses a deep learning model on all of the sensors to predict occupancy and velocity in the future all around the vehicle. As you can tell, our software is a critical component to achieving autonomous driving, and vertical integration with hardware is the ultimate competitive advantage to finally achieving full autonomy. So autonomous vehicles offer a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform mobility. When you're working on transporting people rather than goods, it's critical that your entire system is safe enough for people and not just pizzas. And our vehicle engineers have worked really, really hard to make sure that's true. So even if we build the best AI system in the world, which is exactly what we're doing, we still can't prevent 100% of collisions, because somebody could still run into us when we're just minding our own business. And even though that won't happen often, we do need to be prepared. So our approach represents a fundamental shift from reactive to proactive safety. We call it prevent and protect. What we mean by that is we're using technology to prevent every crash that we can, including the 94% that are caused by human errors. But we're also protecting riders with innovative safety features in case something unexpected happens. And if we drive enough miles, we will encounter other road users who do things they shouldn't. So we need to be as prepared as possible. We've designed advanced safety features into every element of Zoox, including an innovative airbag that inflates between riders and cushions your head, neck, and chest in a totally new way to keep everyone separated and protected. So that's our approach. How are we doing? Well, not only are we getting better and better at driving in dense urban environments with our L3 test vehicles, we've also made significant progress driving our own ground-up robotaxis with nobody in them. We recently completed a critical checkpoint that we haven't talked about publicly yet, operating our vehicle with no one inside, no chase vehicle, and no emergency stop, all on open, private roads with non-Zoox agents, including pedestrians, cyclists, cars, and trucks. And then most importantly, validating all of that with our quantitative safety case. This means we can operate in an unstructured environment at human plus safety levels, and we're almost ready to do that on public roads. The opportunity to reimagine what the future of mobility can look like is immense. We are excited and privileged to get to work on something this worthy, and we can't wait for customers to be able to experience the magic that is riding in a Zoox. It's a categorically different experience than getting in the backseat of a car, whether or not there's someone up front driving. Please follow us along our journey, and I hope you can all experience Zoox in the next few years. Thanks so much.
Please welcome author, science TV correspondent, and radio host, Michio Kaku.
Well, after such a great introduction, I can't wait to hear the speaker myself. You know, I have the privilege of being able to interview on television some of the world's great scientists. And every time I interview these scientists, I ask them the key question, the most important question of all. The question I ask them, this great question, is there intelligent life on the Earth? Well, I was watching the Kardashians on TV last night. And sometimes you really wonder. But one thing for me is very certain, and that is that in this room, we have some of the great minds, the most energetic, the most inquisitive minds. You are the makers of the future. So applaud yourself for being some of the most intelligent people around. In today's talk, I'm going to talk about the exploration of outer space. I'm a physicist. We're going to go centuries, millennia into the future. And who knows, maybe we'll encounter intelligent beings as we venture into the galaxy. But you know, I get a lot of emails. And some of the emails say, Professor, you're wrong. You are really wrong. The aliens are not there. The aliens are here. And then I say to them, how do you know that the aliens walk among us? And they say that's because they've been kidnapped. They've been kidnapped by flying saucers. Well, I say this. The next time you are kidnapped by a flying saucer, for God's sake, steal something. An alien chip, an alien paperclip, anything. Because there's no law against stealing from an extraterrestrial civilization. No law whatsoever. And we need proof that there is something out there in the universe. Well, today, we're going to talk about the future. And I've had the privilege of writing 5 New York Times bestsellers about the future of robotics, the future of the mind, when we communicate telepathically through the internet. My latest book is called The God Equation, about what I do for a living. I work on something called string theory, which we think, but cannot yet prove, is the theory that eluded Einstein for the last 30 years of his life. A theory of everything that says that all the subatomic particles we see in nature are nothing but vibrations on a tiny vibrating string. So what is physics? Physics is the harmonies you can make on these tiny vibrating strings. What is chemistry? Chemistry are the melodies you can play when these strings interact with each other. What is the universe? The universe is a symphony of strings. And then what is the mind of God that Einstein labored for so many decades of his life? The mind of God would be cosmic music resonating through hyperspace. That would be a candidate for the mind of God. But today we're going to ask a different question, and that is life on the earth. Did you know that of all the life forms that have existed on the earth, 99.9% of all living creatures eventually go extinct? Let me repeat that again. 99.9% of all living creatures eventually become extinct. And if you don't believe me, simply dig underneath your feet. When you dig underneath your feet, you encounter all the fossils, all the skeletons and bones of all the creatures that existed before us. And what about the dinosaurs? Well, how come we have no dinosaurs today? And that's because the dinosaurs did not have a space program. Well, today we do have a space program, but look at the odds. One day we will be part of that 99.9% of living forms that never make it. The probability of a city buster, that is the probability of an object that can take out Moscow, Washington, San Francisco, they happen about once every 100 years. And right on schedule, Russia had two city busters in 200 years, right on schedule, in Chelyabinsk and in Tunguska in Russia. What about a nation buster that can take out England, take out Germany? They happen once every few thousand years. And then what about a planet buster? A planet buster takes place once every 50 million years. And then the question is, are we up for another planet buster? 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs were wiped out by an object maybe 6 miles across that slammed into the Yucatan of Mexico, creating a tidal wave perhaps a mile across. Think of the devastation created by just one rock. Think of this dinosaur. When I see a picture like this, I say to myself, what was he thinking? What was he thinking when he saw this rock in the sky? He probably said to himself, oh, shit. I mean, the end of the reign of dinosaurs. And the question is, are we going to go the same way? Well, we do have a space program. How come there are no dinosaurs in this room today? They didn't have what we have. But our space program came to a screeching halt. What happened? Well, there was the Vietnam War, there was the Cold War. But the real reason why the space program came to a dead halt is because of a 4-letter dirty word, cost, C-O-S-T. In the year 1966, the space program consumed about 5% of the entire U.S. federal budget. That was unsustainable. How much does outer space exploration cost? Take a pound of anything. What does it cost to put this pound of anything into orbit around the planet Earth? The answer, $10,000. That is roughly your weight in gold. The next time you see an astronaut in outer space, think of that astronaut made out of solid gold, and you begin to realize the cost to put humans into outer space. But now we're entering a new era of space exploration. Why? Among other reasons, because rockets are now reusable. For example, let's say you're the owner of a sports car factory, and you make a sports car, a beautiful sports car rolls off the factory line. And the sports car goes once around the block and then crashes. How much do sports cars cost if they only go a few blocks and become a pile of junk? That's the space program. We call this gigantic booster rocket, this pinnacle of industrial might, and we shoot it into outer space once. And then what do we do with it? We put it in the oceans. Rockets are now reusable, which means that a new timetable is emerging. We're going to go back into outer space with reusable rockets, propelled not just with public funds, but public and private funds, and billionaires, for whatever reason, for ego, whatever, billionaires are opening up their checkbooks, saying that, yes, I want to be part of it. I want to be part of this new exploration of space. So a new timetable is emerging. In the next few years, we're going to run the first test of a moon rocket, unmanned moon rocket, just within the next 2 years or so. After that, a woman, a person of color, will land on the moon. After that, we're going to build a space station around the moon. And after that, it's on to Mars. And so we're talking about a new era in space travel, an era that's not going to bankrupt the United States. It's going to be self-sufficient. And who knows? Costs are dropping like a rock. And some people are saying that maybe one day we'll have a space hotel in outer space. You see, space travel is no different from the railroads, no different from ordinary transportation, which goes in 3 stages. In the first stage, you have the railroads that ship military supplies, lumber, hardware. That's stage 1. Stage 1 is when a new transportation system ships gigantic heavy goods for heavy industry and the government and the military. Then you eventually enter stage 2. In stage 2, rich people began to say, hey, I can take advantage of this. We can create luxury liners. And then in stage 3, mom and dad now become part of this new revolution. So a space hotel sounds outlandish today, but just realize costs keep plunging, opening up new vistas for possible exploration. And so 3 stages: cars, trains, airplanes, and now rockets. Rockets are now entering stage 2, where people say that all these billionaires going into outer space, what a waste. What a waste, an ego trip, having billionaires go into outer space. All I'm saying is that's the natural sequence. The natural sequence by transportation is developed. And one day, I suspect that perhaps your grandchildren will have the option of honeymooning on the moon. It takes only 3 to 4 days to go to the moon from the Earth. To go to Mars would take maybe 7 to 9 months. But to go to the moon is a hop, skip, and a jump. And then, perhaps after that, on to Mars. Now, Mars is a whole different ball of wax. We're not talking about a 3 or 4 day jump to the moon. We're talking about a journey that takes about 2 years. 7 to 9 months to reach Mars, a few more months to wait for the stars to realign, and then another 7 to 9 months to come back. But there are plans to one day terraform Mars. And the going to Mars is getting cheaper and cheaper. You know the movie The Martian with Matt Damon? That movie cost $100 million. But the Indians sent a probe to Mars for $70 million. In other words, sending Hollywood actors to a movie set impersonating Mars is more expensive than actually going to Mars. So the price has dropped for those reasons, rockets being reusable, public and private partnership, billionaires helping to pave the way for new vistas. Now, of course, the exploration of Mars is not going to happen overnight. It'll be part of a much larger program. And how do we sustain something on that scale? On that scale, we're going to have to rely on the fact that eventually technology will save the day. Sustainability is the name of the game. We don't want a settlement on Mars to be a drain on human society. We want the settlement on Mars to pay for itself. One possibility is to melt the polar ice caps. When you melt the polar ice caps, just remember that Mars, once upon a time, was a lush planet. It had riverbeds. It had oceans, we think. An ocean about the size of the United States of America. Once upon a time, Mars was a lush planet. And how do we think we can terraform Mars? Perhaps by sending up satellites. Satellites that could beam the energy back down on the polar ice caps. Now, you may say to yourself, well, all this is nice, but who's going to foot the bill? One possibility is to mine the asteroid belt. Now, Thomas Jefferson was once our president, and Thomas Jefferson made one of the biggest gambles in all of American history, the Louisiana Purchase. Thomas Jefferson doubled the size of the United States. And then in Thomas Jefferson's memoirs, he said that, well, what have I done? I've doubled the size of the United States, and it'll take 1,000 years, he said. 1,000 years to colonize this vast area, unexplored area called the Louisiana Purchase. Well, what happened soon after Thomas Jefferson wrote those words? What happened? You all read this in your history books. They discovered gold. Gold in California. The gold rush was on. And that reduced this 1,000-year journey to colonize the West into just 100 years. Some people think that what we need is a new Louisiana Purchase, perhaps to mine the asteroid belt. And if we do that, perhaps we'll go even beyond to the extrasolar planets, 5,000 of which have now been cataloged carefully. And what lies beyond that? Well, if you want to see a black hole tonight, go outside, look in the direction of Sagittarius. By rights, in the direction of Sagittarius, there should be a fireball, a gigantic fireball that lights up the night sky every night, outshining the moon. But what do you see when you look in the direction of Sagittarius? Nothing. Nothing. Why? Dust clouds. If you could somehow remove the dust clouds, there's a black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which unfortunately is hidden by dust clouds. What is inside a black hole? Well, nobody knows. If one of you in the audience ever figures out what's inside a black hole, tell me first. And we'll split the Nobel Prize money together. Now, Albert Einstein had an idea. Why not take a black hole and stick two of them together back to back? This is 1935, and Albert Einstein discovers the wormhole, a gateway, perhaps, to go to the stars. And where have you seen this wormhole before? You've all seen it as a child. The first mention of a wormhole in English literature was a children's book called Through the Looking Glass, written by a professor of mathematics at Cambridge University. His name was Charles Dodgson. Being a professor of mathematics at Oxford, he could not write it under his real name, so he wrote it under a fake name, Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll was a mathematician, and he realized if you stick two spaces together, you can create a shortcut through space and time. Now, of course, the energy necessary to harness this power is far beyond anything that we can muster. But we've looked at civilizations in outer space. Perhaps a type 1 civilization beyond the Earth. Perhaps something like what you see in Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon. A type 2 civilization harnesses the power of a star, an entire star, a civilization like Star Trek. Star Trek would be a typical type 2 civilization. And then there's a galactic possibility, a galactic civilization, which you see in Star Wars. And so we physicists have said, in outer space, is it possible that there could be type 1, type 2, and type 3 civilizations that coexist with the planet Earth? Well, find out by reading my book. But now let me close on the following note. When I was a kid, my role model was Albert Einstein. And let me tell you my favorite Einstein story. When Einstein was an old man, he was tired of giving the same talk over and over again. So one day his chauffeur came up to him, and the chauffeur said, "Professor, I'm really a part-time actor. I've heard your speech so many times I've memorized it. So why don't we switch places? I will put on a mustache, I will put on a wig, I will be the great Einstein, and you can put on my jacket and be my chauffeur." Well, Einstein loved the joke. So they switched places. This went along famously until one day, a mathematician in the back asked a very difficult question. And Einstein thought, oh, the game is up. But then the chauffeur said, "That question is so elementary that even my chauffeur here can answer it for you." Thank you very much. Thank you. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce Adam Savage to the stage.
That was really wonderful, Dr. Kaku. I have a couple of follow-up questions. I'm curious if they do open up a hotel in space in a few years. Are you going to go? Are you going to get a room?
No, I'm chicken.
Yeah?
I let the other people get all the accolades and all the glories. I'd rather stay here where the Earth doesn't move.
That's sensible. Now, what do you say to people who decry spending money to explore space when we have significant problems to address right here on Earth?
Well, where does wealth come from anyway? Wealth comes from science, from the Industrial Revolution to the Electric Revolution to the Computer Revolution, and now the Artificial Intelligence Revolution. And space travel is part of wealth generation. Look at the internet. Look at telecommunications. Look at weather satellites, GPS, Wall Street. All of that is done in outer space now. And so outer space generates money, which in turn helps to eliminate income inequality on the planet Earth.
All right, fair enough. I totally agree. But I'm also really curious, reading your books, how you stay so optimistic about humanity and our chances.
Well, let me quote from the immortal words of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who once said that pessimists never win wars. Only optimists win wars. Now, when you take a look at the long-term future of humanity, I think it's going to be touch and go. It's going to be a race against time. But I put my bet on those people who realize that, hey, we can use science to conserve power, create fusion energy, create better solar panels. I bet on scientists who can then use technology to rein in global warming.
Well, that is inspiring. Dr. Kaku, thank you so much. Another hand for Dr. Michio Kaku. All right. Thank you. Well, we are at the end of our first day. Thanks again to all of our amazing speakers today. Talks like this really, really lend depth to the phrase food for thought. So that is a wrap for today. We have tons more to wow you with tomorrow and over the next 2 days. And you also don't want to miss the welcome reception taking place immediately after this out there following in the Tech Showcase. We hope to see you all there. Thanks for being here. I look forward to seeing you all bright and early tomorrow morning. You guys have a great night.